We're still live on JoyNews on Multi TV. This is our continued coverage, our special coverage of the sittings of the Ayawaso West Wogon, a Commission of Inquiry sittings. Very interesting happenings. My name is Daniel Daz. I took over from Kojo Yankson. Malik Abbas-Dabo of our political desk, editor of myjoyonline.com, is still here. Malik, very interesting revelations here.
Very, very interesting revelations.
Specific among when from DCOP George Alex Mensah, who is the Director General of Operations at the Ghana Police Headquarters, is what he said, contrasting that with what Brian Champon, Minister for National Security, said.
Yeah, and also that of what the Minister himself, and I'm talking about Albert Kandapa, said in relation to matters relating to where did the vehicles come from, the vehicle that was used, and we all saw the vehicle that these people were driving in. He says categorically that he does not know that vehicle. He had never seen it. Of course, that ties in with what the Interior Minister Ambrose Derry said yesterday, because he had also said that that vehicle did not belong to the police and that the police didn't know it. And Alex Mensah confirmed that. One other contentious issue was, what did he tell the media when he was asked about the identities of these persons who were in this vehicle, which he does not know, and who perpetrated the violent acts which have become the subject of all of these commission hearings and the general discussions. He said at the time that he did not know them, and he insists that even now he did not know the people. Of course, his explanation that he had just stepped out of his car, which was repeated or regurgitated by Brian Champon and Albert Kandapa yesterday, was the same, that he had just stepped out of his car. He was confronted by the media houses, some media personnel who asked him whether he knew these people and whether he could identify them. He said no, he couldn't, because he didn't see them, and so he could not tell who they were. And in fact, it was not just because he had just stepped out of the car, but in reality, he did not know the persons involved.
So in simple terms, he did not know them, he did not know of them either.
Yes, absolutely. Then he explains some of the points that were made yesterday about the detachment or the attachment of some police personnel to various units. He talked about YOCO, the BNI, National Security. That ties in with the explanation that was given yesterday about the team of 60 people made up of 25 police officers who were in police uniform and 35 national security operatives who were in this, the jackets that we saw, the black and khaki trousers that we saw.
Some of them wearing masks.
Some of them wearing masks. The mask matter didn't really feature much in his testimony.
Of course, you wouldn't expect it to feature because he says he does not know them.
Absolutely.
He says he does not know of them. They are not operating under his command. So he's not really able to give a lot of information regarding who exactly they were and what they were doing there. Malik, from yesterday, one thing seems to have been established. Number one, this was an incident that occurred outside your regular election. So it not only occurred outside the election activity, it did not only occur outside of the election polling stations, it also occurred outside of the regular arrangements for security regarding the elections. Because again, you hear him say, explain what the hierarchy and the chain of command when it comes to securing the process is, and it's very different from this group that went to Delali Kwesi Brimpong's house.
Then one thing you have to observe is that there seems to be, from all the 4 testimonies that we have heard and seen, there seems to be a consistent reference to that operation being distinct from the election monitoring security process. That is difficult to understand, because how do you divorce what happened there from the election? Because the persons whose premises that these people went to and which led to all of the disagreement and the subsequent shootings and maimings was a key person in that election. And I'm talking about Brimpong Yeboah, who is the NDC parliamentary candidate in that election. How are you able to distinguish between the persons, the security persons who were monitoring the elections, from the operations of these people in an operational zone which happens to be close to a polling station, and according to the Electoral Commission chairperson, Mrs. Jean Mensah, this area was 140 meters away from a polling station, but the residence, and we were told it's a warehouse by the National Security Minister Albert Kandapa yesterday, belongs to a candidate in that election, the main contender in that election. The difficulty is trying to draw that dichotomy that they have tried to draw between the two things, election security monitoring and this operation, which we're told was aborted, that the National Security Minister said they picked up intelligence that arms were being stockpiled in this warehouse owned by a candidate in the election. They sent a team of 60 people made up of 25 police officers and 35 national security operatives. The purpose of that was to go and check whether the intelligence was true, that arms were being stockpiled in this place which belonged to somebody who was a candidate in the election, and that operation was distinct from the operation of the security guarding the elections. And yet this operation directly related to the election, to the extent that it involved somebody who was a candidate in the election, and also to the extent that the weapons that you said you were going to look for, you aborted that after the shootings happened. That is difficult to understand and to appreciate and to believe.
Some questions, Malik, that sort of elucidates further the point you are making. If the police had assigned security to Delale Kwesi Brimpong and they had been confronted by this new unit, what would have been that outcome, engagement between the police from the regular officers of the Ghana Police Service and these policemen who had been seconded to national security and had been attached there?
Absolutely. And was he entitled to that protection? I would imagine yes.
Yes, he was.
And
he was.
So,
those questions have been raised in the
So
past.
if he was entitled to that protection, and these persons would have been police officers, would those persons not have had the responsibility to ensure that whilst they were protecting him, persons around him or himself would not be allowed to do anything illegal as far as the intelligence was concerned?
Malik, there's another element of this conversation that Mr. George Alex Mensah, DCOP, George Alex Mensah, reveals. Very interesting. It looks like everything operational regarding the police and this incident has halted for two reasons. Number one, there's a commission of inquiry. Number two, the IGP has set up a committee. So then again, you find him repeatedly making the statements that outside of the remit of that committee, no operational report has been taken. Nothing in terms of trying to understand what has happened has taken place. Is that regular from when you see?
And you would find that even basic information they do not have. Many of the persons who have appeared, particularly himself, the National Security Minister, the Minister of State at the National Security Ministry, appear to not have very basic information that ordinarily should have been available to them. And of course, the example they cite is that, or the basis for that, is that investigations are being conducted. And you would imagine that after more than 2 weeks after this incident happened, some basic things as to where were these people from, who were they, all of those answers would have had. What exactly transpired? The person who is in charge of police operations, and I'm talking about DCOP Alex Mensah, should have had that information. But of course, he explains that to the extent that this was done at the regional level, it is the regional elections task force that conducted the security for the Ayawaso West Wogomba election, and therefore they ought to have submitted a report on the basis of which they would check whether the plans that they had put in place, whether everything went according to plan. But he emphasizes the point that the incident which has formed the basis for this discussion was not part of the election security monitoring, and that distinction ought to be drawn.
Now, there was a curious happening during this hearing, Malik, of Mr. DCOP, Mr. George Alex Mensah, right around the time where he was referring to the Accra Region Police. Chief Superintendent Kwesi Fori entered the room.
And I think 2 or 3 others.
And 2 or 3 other officers. Now, Justice Emil Shaw, chairman of the commission, asked that he leaves the room. I'm raising this point because yesterday, Mr. Brian Champon and Mr. Albert Kandapa were in the room whilst Mr. Ambrose Derry was being questioned. Of course, they left on their own volition. it's not clear whether Mr. Justice Emil Short had these points communicated to them in some way. But compare what happened yesterday to today. What impacts do you think that statement had on what we saw?
Well, I think it's basic reasoning that once you are to appear before them for a testimony, that you can't be in the room, so that we don't want people's answers, and I would imagine this is the position of the commission, that they don't want people to give choreographed submissions and presentations. And once you sit there and you can have eye contact, you can give signals, and people can take cues and give clues, you will have a choreographed submission, and that's not what the commission wants. The purpose of the commission is to gather information. It's a fact-finding commission, to gather information on the basis of which they can make recommendations, on the basis of which recommendations maybe some prosecutions or some decision will be taken which will nip all of this in the bud, so that in the future we will no longer have the kind of violence that has attended by-elections for many years, and this appearing to be one of the worst form of violence in our by-elections. But we have had serious violence in by-elections before, but this appeared to be very brazen, and I think it is the reason why the commission is set up, and the commission is not interested in entertaining any choreographed submissions and presentations.
Especially when you found Chief Superintendent Kwesi Fori sitting just
right behind, absolutely.
In fact, at the point he was sitting in the way of our cameraman.
and I can imagine that he would go close to somebody who is giving testimony, because clearly your mere presence there may actually be a kind of clue, or you may give him cues which will alter his answers. That means that those answers will not be honest testimony, and the commission clearly won't accept that.
A bit of background to this will be the fact that the secretary to the commission, Ernest Kofi Abochi, former dean of the Gimpa Law School, has said that the commission does not want persons, that they has not made public the list of witnesses they are going to call. So the witnesses may not know each other as
Absolutely.
witnesses. So Chief Superintendent Kwesi Fori may not have known. Though, of course, it will be quite obvious that the Director General in charge of operations, George Alex Mensah, would be called, since he's one of the key actors in this. But
Absolutely.
then again, that sanctity, if I can say, or the secrecy around the list of persons would be preserved. Malik, general comments on what we've observed so far since yesterday. This morning we had Jean Mensah, we've had George Alex Mensah, yesterday 3 ministers.
Yes, so far five people have appeared. I think what has transpired is a number of things that have been both positive and both problematic. The positives have been the answers have not been they've not been choreographed, and they've not been a walk in the park. You have seen very aggressive questioning by both the lawyer and the committee members, who are asking probing questions determined to get to the bottom of the matter. What also has happened is some of the answers have left you wondering whether all of us are safe. And yesterday you heard one of the commission members, Professor Henry Tamensa Bonsu, taking on the National Security Minister, who expressed worry about the increasing spate of misconduct and activities of vigilante groups and lawless acts.
And when he said he was worried, Henry Tamensa Bonsu said it's not your job to be worried,
and
it's
rightly
your job
so.
to find the solution.
And rightly so.
Very interesting engagements that we've been having so far. But since we are referring to engagement of this Commission of Inquiry, Malik, let's take a listen to Madam Jean Mensah speaking this morning, particularly about the presence of armed security personnel at the polling stations.
There were no masked men who were wielding arms in any of the 137 polling stations. All our reports that have come in and the monitors who have monitored, including members of the commission, did not identify any of these armed masked men at any of the 137 polling stations.
Are you saying that you have actually investigated and you can confirm that
yes.
of a truth there were no masked men at any of the polling stations. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Now, you said you have cited the Kodeo report.
Yes.
That report makes it very clear that there were masked armed men at some polling stations. What do you have to say about that?
I still stand by, the reports we have received that there were no masked armed men at any of the polling stations.
There is also a report.
And that's Jean Mensah, Electoral Commission chairperson, giving her testimony this morning. You're still watching our special coverage of the IRC West Wuogon Commission of Inquiry sittings. My name is Daniel Daze. Malik Abbas-Dabo is here with me in the studios. Malik, we are soon going back to hear the next witness with the Commission of Inquiry. But finally, your expectations going forward in just 30 seconds.
Well, I think that people will continue to give honest testimonies so that all of us can come to an understanding that they have been forthright, they have been honest, they have been candid, and that this was not a charade. And
I'll come back to Malik with an answer to my question we've started, the conversation we started on the morning show today, as to whether this commission is serving its purpose. It's one that we started this morning. We will continue with that.